Guys, we were so close in getting the ultimate ultra-wide gaming monitor. Quite a mouthful, I didn't even realize that. Now this is a review for the Acer Nitro XV340CKP. Other than being a mouthful, it's a 34-inch ultra-wide monitor that has IPS panel, 1440p resolution, and also has 144Hz with AMD FreeSync technology. Check, 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 which is awesome. Now, this monitor can be found for around £570 in the UK. I say around that because its RRP is around £650, while in the US, it's actually far more affordable at around $450. Damn you guys in the US. But anyway, before getting into this honest, unbiased, independent review, if you want to keep up with my channel, and if you aren't already, definitely do subscribe and of course hit that bell notification to get notified when a new video goes live. And furthermore, if you're on social media, I'd very much appreciate a follow on Instagram or Twitter. Again, gives you another means of keeping up with my shenanigans. Elsewhere, if you're interested in keeping up with the latest news or reviews on all electric or hybrid vehicles, then you should definitely check out Totally EV. I'm essentially producing a new car review every single week, so you won't want to miss out. And of course, the future is pretty much electric, at least in my opinion. So to kick things off, I'm going to briefly summarize its specs. It's got a resolution of 3440x1440p that runs at 144Hz, which is great. It's got an IPS panel. It's a 21:9 aspect ratio. It has a quoted response time of 1 millisecond VRB, and yes, we will be talking about that in a bit. And it's got two built-in 3-watt speakers, which I must say, I normally don't comment on monitor built-in speakers because you might be able to see bookshelf speakers in the background, and gamers, you should be using headphones or headsets or something like that. But for built-in speakers, these are absolutely incredible. Whatever Acer has done in order to optimize the overall sound quality is pretty impressive, to say the least. And in this respect, this is one of the best sounding monitors that I've actually come across. And for an ultra-wide format, that might be of interest for the people who are going to be using this, let's say, for console gamers, or for those people who just want to use it, let's say, as almost like a Netflix kind of TV and you don't want to use your bookshelf speakers. So props to Acer in that respect. Now, elsewhere, the monitor has HDMI and DisplayPort connections to choose from, which is no surprise given it's a modern 1440p monitor. And in terms of the build quality, I think Acer have done a fantastic, although not flawless, job. In terms of the build quality of the monitor, it looks fantastic. It's got a 3-sided borderless design, and furthermore, it's actually a flat panel, which is quite rare because most monitors, which are ultra-wide format, have got a kind of curvature to them. So it's nice to see a flat 34-inch ultra-wide. In this respect as well, the stand gives you good amount of adjustment, so you can find a good ergonomics. It does adjust to a good height, so you've got height, tilt, and in terms of swiveling around, you can do that, although it's based on a kind of plastic type of insert fan at the bottom of the stand rather than the monitor swiveling on its stand. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the only thing I really don't like about its build quality, or should I say the design, is the OSD buttons. For you to access them, it's kind of found at the bottom right and behind the monitor and a little bit hard to press. I just wish they'd just kept it at the front. It just would have made things way more intuitive, as is the case with my Acer XF270HU, which is an old school 2014-2015 panel, but it has it at the front. It makes it very easy to interchange between OSD settings, and also if you want to enable or disable overdrive, for example, if you're switching between games. So I wish Acer had addressed this, or indeed included like a joystick control, which would have made things far more intuitive. So now we get on to the OSD, which is a little bit hard to access via the buttons found behind the monitor. Now, through the picture mode, you can see over here the brightness setting. You can of course adjust this to your heart's content, and we'll talk about the peak brightness that you can get. You can also enable or disable low blue light mode. As for color, I would suggest you leaving it on warm mode. For the vast majority of users, I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised at how the colors are on that. However, you've got sRGB mode, and we'll talk about what this does to overall brightness, and also in terms of if you should be using it or not. As for the audio, this has got built-in speakers, as I mentioned before. Very impressive to say the least, and you can see over here the volume I've got at 30%. It's actually plenty loud for a small size room. Now, in terms of FreeSync, you can see I've just left it enabled just to showcase what gets disabled when you have FreeSync enabled. The overdrive, VRB, and ultra low latency modes all get disabled. So if you want to have these modes and you want to play around with them, which I would very much suggest you to do, you'll have to disable FreeSync. Now, a little note on VRB, this will only become present if you have it set to 120 Hz. So this is set at 144 Hz right now, and VRB is therefore disabled and you can't enable it or flick through the options. And again, we'll talk about all these modes through the gaming section of this review. You've got the OSD menu, the system setup, where you can also assign 2 hotkeys, which is nice to see, and then a bit more information about the panel itself. Now, with that aside, let's get on to the image quality. And here, I think the monitor does an okay job, although there's some things that I really want to highlight, and kind of my biggest frustrations about this monitor, specifically given it has an IPS panel that runs at 1440p. Now, in terms of its sRGB gamut coverage, it's at 99.5%, and the gamut volume overextends at 123%. In terms of how it looks like, well, you can see for yourselves that it kind of overextends and actually pretty much hits every single color to a T. The only issue, however, is that when put across the sRGB profile, as I mentioned before in terms of the OSD, what you'll find is your average delta E is only going to be sitting at 2.42 with a maximum delta E of 5.89. which isn't that impressive for an IPS panel, and furthermore not one that has a dedicated sRGB mode. So I was just expecting a little bit more from Acer over here, given my prior experiences with Acer monitors, specifically ones which have this dedicated sRGB mode. It would have been great to see pinpoint sRGB color accuracy. Unfortunately, that is not the case. So if you're going to be someone who's going to be using this for color editing or video grading, you will just have to bear in mind that it's not a pinpoint color accurate monitor. Now, the disappointment continues when it comes to its contrast ratio, where I've got a tested 834:1, which is really not that impressive for an IPS panel. Here, some of its competitors, which namely use VA panels, far exceed my expectations in this respect and are hitting in excess of 1,500 to 2,000 to 1 contrast ratio. So again, this is another kind of weak spot for this IPS panel. Then continuing to that, we've got its brightness. And here it's somewhat laughable, and one of the things which really did put me off, at maximum brightness you're going to be hitting at peak 280 nits. In fact, Acer even claimed lower than that at 250 nits. In terms of its minimum brightness, it can reach down to 40 nits, which is pretty impressive. And as for you enabling sRGB mode, as I mentioned before, if you want to enable it or not, it goes to 112 nits, which is pretty dim to say the least. Now, if you were to enable VRB, this is going to limit brightness to 107 nits, and if you have it on its extreme mode, it gets down to 54 nits, which is basically, well, you can't really see the monitor unless you're in pretty much a pitch black room. Now, there is some benefits to VRB, and we'll talk about this in the gaming section, but ultimately what I'm trying to say over here is that the brightness of the monitor is pretty disappointing. And this does come across if you're going to be playing some HDR content, because this monitor does support an HDR10 signal. Now, while some console gamers might be fine with that, but for PC it just is an absolutely terrible job, because why include HDR in the first place if you're going to only hit up to 250 nits? It just makes no sense to me. I think here, if it had HDR 600, I think that's probably pushing the boat. Maybe HDR 400, I still think it's kind of pointless anyway. It just would have added maybe a little bit extra. But at HDR 250 nits, it doesn't even exist as a standard. It's just silly, and I'm just really disappointed in this respect. And one of the biggest disappointments for me was its overall brightness, and this can affect a lot of people when it comes to using the monitor in, let's say, a bright sunlit room. Now, similarly over here, the brightness uniformity is also pretty disappointing, because I noticed it even with my own plain eyes, just sitting in front, and I could kind of see kind of like a tail off on the top left hand side. When I put it on my SpiderX Elite calibrator, I also noticed that this was the same thing that the calibrator was picking up, and it just wasn't good across the board, and again, a little bit disappointing. As for backlight bleed, it is present, so you will notice it a little bit. It's not too severe, but this is completely panel lottery, so it just really depends as to what panel you get in terms of your backlight bleed to see if it's acceptable or not. But you can see from the pictures for yourself if you think that this panel will be acceptable for your use case. To summarize, in terms of its image quality, it's one of its biggest flaws, and I found that this is its monitor's kind of Achilles heel. It is going to be really good in terms of performance, in terms of gaming, and we'll touch upon that in just a second, but when it comes to image quality, I was just expecting a little bit more specifically from an IPS panel. Now, if you're going to get this monitor and you don't really care about overall color accuracy and the brightness will suffice and you're not going to use HDR, then I would suggest just using it on the warm mode, so therefore you're not capped in terms of brightness, and you will get a pretty okay image out the box, so you don't have to worry too much about calibrations and all that stuff. Now, while its image quality wasn't that impressive, its gaming performance really did leave me jaw-dropped, and that's why at the beginning of the video I said it's almost the perfect ultra-wide monitor. Because at its price, I think you'll struggle to find a better monitor that's suited for competitive gaming. Even if you take competitive gaming kind of completely out of the equation, this monitor's response time and input lag is sensational to say the least. So in terms of the settings that you might want to use, if you're playing more casual games, you might want to leave the overdrive on normal setting, although you can even get away with extreme mode overdrive, where I notice very little inverse ghosting. Of course, it will depend in terms of how graphically intense the game you're actually throwing at the monitor is. In this respect, playing Counter-Strike, for example, extreme overdrive, I didn't notice any sort of inverse ghosting, and furthermore just meant that the response time of the monitor was the best that it could get. As for its input lag, again here, seriously impressive. Now, I've tested in excess of 175 monitors, and I would classify this as one of the best in terms of its input lag. It's completely, well, I couldn't even notice it, and again, tailored with its response time, it just led for a fantastic overall user experience. Now, elsewhere, you might want to consider enabling VRB mode, which takes things to another level, where even Acer claimed that with VRB mode you're getting 1 millisecond response time. I can't verify these claims, but what I will say is that if you do have VRB enabled, specifically in its extreme mode setting, you're going to get an even better experience with even less blur as well. So this is a great thing, but again, you should just bear in mind that it's going to limit your overall brightness, and it might not be actually playable at such a low brightness, specifically in its extreme mode. Now, as for casual gaming, this is very much suitable for that, specifically given it's got AMD FreeSync technology built in as well. And here I tested it with my RTX 2080 Super, connected over DisplayPort and running NVIDIA G-Sync pendulum demo and actually playing some games with it, and I noticed no sort of flickering problems either in this respect. So therefore you can enable G-Sync and have it running as long as you've got the right setup, or indeed if you've got an AMD graphics card, utilize AMD FreeSync for a kind of tear-free gaming experience. Just bear in mind again that if you were to enable AMD FreeSync, you're not going to get the super low latency and fantastic response time of this monitor because of just how the technologies work. They don't work together, and you will have seen the option grayed out if you watch the OSD section of this review. Now, ultimately, this really leads me on to my verdict. What do I make about this Acer monitor? Well, I just think they were so close off perfection. If this monitor was brighter, if the monitor was slightly more color accurate and had a little bit better contrast ratio, you'd have pretty much the ultimate ultra-wide gaming monitor that money could buy. Given this price point, I can't think of a better alternative. The problem here is that it's not exactly great in that domain, but will gamers care, like myself? Potentially not. It's just that the brightness might mean that if you're in a bright sunlit room, you might not be able to see your monitor properly, and the brightness uniformity might kind of throw you off, specifically if you're going to be looking at more visually appealing games which don't look like a potato, like Counter-Strike. So in this respect, it really depends on your usage. So I'll be very much intrigued to hear your thoughts on the monitor below. And in my opinion, I can see myself kind of split in two ways. On one aspect, I really love it. On the other aspect, I kind of hate it. And I don't really know what to say. I'm kind of torn. There'll be some suggestions from other monitors that I've reviewed down in the description below. So specifically, if you're a casual gamer, you might want to consider one of Acer's competitors, which is from AOC. And I think one of that monitor itself is actually pretty much flawless when it comes to casual gamers, but not quite tick every single box when it comes to competitive gamers. And then if you go out of this budget in terms of the Acer range, then you can find some fantastic monitors, but they pretty much cost almost 2 times the price. And in this respect, those will tick every single box. So maybe my expectations are too high. I don't know. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this review. If you have, give it a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, of course, and favorite and share, as it always helps the channel grow. All right, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.